or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, August 16th, 2026 issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Higher Education Invests in Democracy by John B. King, Jr. For 2.5 centuries, it has been a fundamental American value to serve your community. We see it in those who serve in uniform, volunteer in firehouses and food pantries, serve on school boards, care for elderly neighbors, mentor young people, or step up when their neighbors and wider communities need them. These acts of service take many forms, but they rest on a common idea. Citizenship is an active commitment. It asks us to recognize a responsibility not just to ourselves, but to our community and to our entire nation. That kind of civic commitment does not develop by accident. Part of the responsibility of public higher education system is to help instill and nurture the American values of service to others and of building a better society. That is something that the State of University of New York system on our 64 campuses has worked tirelessly to achieve. SUNY programs and initiatives, including the Empire State Service Corps, which empowers our undergraduates to engage in paid public service work to support local communities throughout the state, help enrich students' lives and build a lifelong love of civic engagement. At a time when too much of the public life rewards outrage over understanding and division over dialogue, higher education has a responsibility to help students develop the skills to engage in civil discourse, even and especially with those that may not agree. Successful higher education does not tell students what to think. It teaches them how to grapple with unfamiliar ideas and work alongside others, ultimately empowering them with the tools needed to make informed and educated decisions. That begins by helping students encounter new perspectives. On a college campus, students meet people from different backgrounds, cultures, faiths, political beliefs, and life experiences. They are challenged to test their own assumptions, examine lessons from what's come before, and develop the skills to engage in constructive dialogue rather than retreat into ideological silos. As the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education, SUNY recognizes our responsibility to create opportunities for students to become thoughtful and engaged members of society. Through Building Bridges grants, student groups are designing projects that foster constructive dialogue, combat hate and bias, and build connections across lines of difference. SUNY has also made civil discourse a core undergraduate learning outcome for all students, supported nonpartisan voter engagement through the All-In Campus Democracy Challenge, doubled the Empire State Service Corps through the support of Governor Kathy Hochul in the legislature, provided faculty professional development around civic learning through our partnership with the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, and created a faculty research fellowship tied to America's 250th anniversary to deepen public understanding of our nation's democratic experience. Initiatives across SUNY campuses, from our community colleges to our comprehensive and technical colleges to our national research in universities, are part of our system. Wide focus to empower students with the skills and experiences to engage civilly, think critically, disagree constructively, and participate fully in civic life. Those skills matter in every field, whether a graduate becomes a teacher, a nurse, engineer, entrepreneur, public servant, or community volunteer. Too often, debates about higher education focus on a narrow set of elite institutions, but for most Americans, higher education means the public university close to home, a community college, a certificate program, a transfer pathway, an online course, or a night class taken while working or raising a family. These institutions are where millions of students pursue the American dream and strive to achieve upward mobility. These institutions are where students learn alongside classmates whose experiences may be very different from their own. That is why affordability and access are not separate from the civic mission of higher education. Rather, they are central to it. The more students who pursue college, the more perspectives we bring into our classrooms, our communities, and our democracy. When access is limited and opportunities are denied due to prohibitive cost, we lose not only future workers, but future neighbors, volunteers, public servants, and leaders. As we mark 250 years since our nation's founding, we should celebrate the promise of American democracy while recognizing that it is always dependent on each generation doing the work to strengthen it. That means continuing to invest in civic education, public service, and institutions that bring people together rather than push them apart. And that means investing in public higher education. If we want a stronger democracy tomorrow, we must support the places that prepare students not only for successful careers, but for lives of service, leadership, and contribution to the communities and country we all share. From programs like the Empire State Service Corps, now New York's largest AmeriCorps program, that provide opportunities to give back to local communities, to initiatives like Building Bridges grant program that supports civil discourse on campus, SUNY is leading the way on civic engagement and civic virtue. Public higher education remains one of America's greatest democratic investments and responsibilities. Congress further shrinks safety net when families need it most, by Kelly Osborne. Sometimes you lose even when you win. That's what it feels like trying to make ends meet in today's economy, and our ever-shrinking safety net isn't helping. After years on a waiting list for subsidized housing, I finally made it to the front of the line. It should have been a moment of relief. Instead, because I received housing assistance, my Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or Food Assistance benefit, was cut by 42%. One step forward, 2 steps back. For millions of Americans, the programs that help us survive hard times are themselves in crisis. That means people like me and our families are in crisis too. Our housing system is broken. Waiting lists stretch on for years. The paperwork is endless and often impossible to navigate. Once, I received a letter asking me to confirm I still wanted to remain on the waiting list, but it arrived after the deadline to respond. Another time, I was told I'd lose my place because I hadn't updated my information, even though I had. I ended up having to restart the application process, even though the mistake was theirs. The administrative hoops we are forced to jump through keep getting higher. Fixing bureaucratic errors means hours on the phone, repeated follow-ups, and taking unpaid time off work to visit government offices. SNAP has been a lifeline for me and more than 40 million Americans, yet the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, passed a year ago, imposes harsher paperwork requirements, reduces eligibility, and shifts enormous costs to states, making food assistance harder to access. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, 10% of recipients have lost access to food assistance nationally, and the figure rises higher in some states. That number will climb as more restrictions go into effect. Those cuts won't just hurt people who receive benefits. SNAP is one of the country's most effective economic multipliers, supporting local grocery stores, farmers, and businesses. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act also takes a devastating toll on Medicaid. As a result, I've lost coverage for medication treatment for a serious medical condition and the machine I rely on to treat my sleep apnea. At the same time, 4 million people have lost Affordable Care Act marketplace coverage because Congress allowed enhanced premium subsidies to expire. As with SNAP, some of the most severe cuts are still ahead, including Medicaid cuts conveniently scheduled for after this year's elections. Food, housing, healthcare. These are basic human needs. Instead of strengthening the safety net during an affordability crisis, Congress and the administration have chosen to weaken it further. The programs that help address illness and homelessness have become political targets, with cuts used to help finance tax breaks for billionaires and corporations and increased military spending. These choices send a troubling message about whose lives this country values and whose struggles it is willing to ignore. We need to speak up for the kind of country we want to live in, a country where working families, seniors, people with disabilities, and anyone facing hard times can count on a basic measure of security. Today, the sacrifices are falling almost entirely on those who can least afford them. People working for low wages, living with illness or disability, and raising families in an increasingly unaffordable economy. We deserve leaders who will build a country that works for everyone, not just those at the top. In the wealthiest nation on earth, that shouldn't be too much to ask. Newsflash. We live in a mixed economy, old labels aside, by Froma Harrop. Democratic Senate nominee Abdul El-Sayed of Michigan keeps calling himself a capitalist, and the Democratic Socialists of America keep backing him to the eyeballs. Why? Because the DSA understands that El-Sayed has to say that to win over Democrats in a moderate state like Michigan. They firmly expect that once elected, he would do as they say, which conforms with what he truly believes. Confusing? Yes, but let's move beyond this war of labels. Let's stop using socialist and capitalist as either a compliment or a denunciation. The United States has a mixed economy. It has an economic system in which both government and the private sector control resources. The American government runs public education, Medicare, and the U.S. Postal Service. Why does a stamp on a letter going from a remote farmhouse in North Dakota to Chicago cost the same as a stamp on a letter sent from Chicago apartment to another 3 blocks away? In a purely capitalist system, the stamp's price would have reflected the difference in the cost of delivery. The North Dakotan would have to pay for this service, a lot more. But U.S. law mandates universal service, which keeps the cost of a stamp fixed. Thus, dense cities subsidize mail delivery in rural areas. Private companies such as UPS and FedEx charge vastly higher prices for delivery to remote places. Note that President Trump has supported selling off the USPS to a private company. Franklin D. Roosevelt pushed through the Social Security Act of 1935 as part of his New Deal program. America was in the jaws of the Great Depression, and FDR used the power of the federal government to create jobs, stabilize the financial system, and keep the destitute elderly alive. New York's Democratic Socialist Mayor Zohran Mamdani said he's another FDR. But FDR said, "No one in the United States believes more firmly than I in the system of private business, private property, and private profit." Roosevelt's new government programs were intended to save the capitalist market system from collapsing, not, to use Mamdani's words, replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism. Socialist Bernie Sanders heralds Sweden as a socialist model, citing its free health care, free college, and so forth. He also says, "I don't think billionaires should exist." Sanders may not be up to date on Sweden's economy. It is highly capitalist, with more billionaires per capita than the United States. The social programs he admires are supported by taxes. Sweden, meanwhile, has been tightening the rules for receiving government benefits. For example, it's been cutting benefits to those not working. It has also adopted a hyper-restrictive immigration policy. In addition to the shock of a massive influx of people from very different cultures, Swedes rebelled at the impoverished newcomers' claims on its social programs. The number of migrants entering Sweden was down to 12,000 last year from 117,000 in 2016. And the country is trying to get people already there with residency permits to leave. What do the abolish ICE Democratic Socialists think of that? As conservative economist Milton Friedman famously put it, it's just obvious you can't have a free immigration and a welfare state. Here's how it works. Our capitalist market system generates a huge amount of wealth that can be taxed to pay for social and other programs. A balance must be found between encouraging wealth creation and crafting a tax code able to raise money for desired public needs. That's a lot harder than throwing down dated labels. Toxic return. Contaminants found near Love Canal demand swift action and help for residents. A decades-old environmental nightmare appears to be reawakening in Niagara Falls. We can only hope its extent will be minimal. As reported by the News, Mackenzie Schumann, concerningly high levels of lead, DDT, and many other toxins have been found in the soil of a home on 99th Street, about 100 yards away from one of the country's most notorious toxic waste sites, Love Canal. The homeowners, Jocelyn and Dan McKiernan, bought their property in 2020, assured by legally required disclosures that there was no known environmental problems. But last month, pool contractors turned up materials resembling carbon rods and black ash. The DEC tested the soil and found concerning contaminants, including levels of lead up to 154 times above New York's safe limits of 63 parts per million. There were also high levels of antimony, a toxic chemical released during mining, smelting, or industrial activities. And there have been health problems. Jocelyn McKiernan has had 5 miscarriages within 3 years, as well as kidney issues. Her oldest son has hydrocephalus, which requires around-the-clock medical care, and the other 2 children have reported frequent stomach aches and headaches. It all sounds too familiar. Thus far, New York's Department of Environmental Conservation and Department of Health have not agreed to relocate this family. Their teams have yet to do a thorough examination of the property, including more soil testing, as well as an assessment of the interior air quality. Given what we know, it's hard to believe relocation won't be necessary. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. With such a history, it's not really shocking that the toxic contaminants have reappeared in this location. There was never any overwhelmingly clear consensus on whether the areas surrounding Love Canal were suitable for resettlement. When those decisions were made back in the late 80s and early 90s, they emerged from a cacophony of conflicting opinions. A range of disputes were well documented by the Buffalo News reporters at the time. It might be instructive to revisit them. In a January 1990 story by 2 veteran news reporters, the late Paul McLennan and the late Margaret Hammersley, it was clear that an initial environmental impact document that paved the way for resettlement was distrusted by many. As reported, the New York Environmental Institute stated, "We contend that the Love Canal contaminated area will ultimately cause problems and will have to be remediated. People should never be subjected to such a toxic threat." It further claimed that the Love Canal Area Revitalization Agency failed to conduct a comprehensive environmental assessment. Lois Gibbs, the former Niagara Falls housewife who led the charge to expose the toxic dangers of the Love Canal, actively opposed resettlement efforts. In a September 1989 letter to the News, Gibbs wrote, "If the government achieves its goal of moving people back into Love Canal, the big losers will be the American people. Corporations want to fool the public into thinking that they can make the areas like Love Canal habitable again, yet no one will say it is safe." For many, the decision to make a habitability decision based on comparing the Love Canal residential area with other neighborhoods, rather than analyzing the actual chemicals found, was the key to the dispute. As a January 1992 news story relates, the EPA ruled in 1990 that a formal risk assessment wasn't possible because too little was known about the more than 200 chemicals found at the former dump. Instead, Soil samples taken from the Love Canal after the area was cleaned and capped were compared with soil samples from two other Niagara Falls neighborhoods, Cheektowaga and the town of Tonawanda. In areas where the testing compared favorably with the other neighborhoods, resettlement was approved. Long buried problems have a way of making their way back to the surface. We don't know to what degree may be the case with Love Canal. But now is not the time to try and rebury them. Families like the McKiernans deserve the truth and every possible assistance from New York State. My view. Hockey, art have a lot in common, by avid Sabres fan Dean Kutlowski. This off-season, Alex Took's contract and Peyton Krebs' arbitration sparked chatter about how hockey is a business. True enough, but is hockey essentially a business? This longtime Buffalo Sabres fan says no. I write as a Western New York native and history professor. As NHL training camps and the school year approach, it becomes clear that hockey extends beyond dollars and cents. Hockey is art. It's about the creativity on the ice. Rasmus Dahlin eluding opponents, skating end-to-end, and scoring. It also entails aesthetics generally. Online debates about the visual appeal of the NHL uniforms put the Sabres near the top. One Buffalo radio personality remarked that the recent Buffalo-Montreal playoff series featured the league's two best sweaters. Hockey is at home in art galleries. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts has Serge Lemoyne's Dryden, 1975, a portrait of the Canadiens' great goaltender. In 2010, the Albright Knox Art Gallery hosted Sabres at 40, a photographic retrospective on the team's first 4 decades. Hockey is literature. HBO Max's Heated Rivalry originated in Game Changers, 6 novels by Rachel Reed. Roach Carrier's short story, The Hockey Sweater, combines a coming-of-age tale with assertions of Francophone identity. The young protagonist idolizes the Canadiens' Maurice Rocket Richard and despises the Toronto Maple Leafs. Hockey is cinematic. Think of Kurt Russell as Herb Brooks in Miracle, 2004. Hockey is poetry. The Montreal Canadiens have appropriated the line, "The torch be yours to hold it high," from In Flanders Field by John McCrae, a Canadian soldier-physician during World War I. My students discuss this poem's relationship to wartime sacrifice and perseverance. They scrutinize image, showing how the poppy, mentioned in its second line, became a symbol of remembrance in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, where one can visit McCrae's home in Guelph. And they learn how the Habs have used the torch in ceremonies to highlight the players' devotion to collective, if less momentous, causes. I show them on the line emblazoned in English and French on the Canadiens' dressing room wall. Hockey is theater. The banging of the drum, the spectacle of the action, Rick Jeanneret's voice, and the chants of "Let's Go Buffalo," the national anthems, Hard Rock Stadium anthems, and strains of Better Days provide a musical score. The dénouement is the game-winning goal Bobby Orr's airborne exploit in 1970 comes to mind. For me, hockey is history. It's team lore, how the puck drop ceremony at the Sabres' first ever home game lacked a puck. It's a larger social and political questions. The suspension of Rocket Richard in 1955 spawned a riot that foreshadowed Quebec's quiet revolution and the Quebecois' nationalism. And try to imagine the Cold War without hockey. In between lies the NHL history. The league's early builders and heroes are honored in the names of its trophies. No other Big Four North American sport appears so reverent of its past. But it's so much more. A revision of the Rodney Dangerfield adage about on-ice fisticuffs seems in order. Last night I went to the hockey game and the humanities broke out. The only communist threat is coming from the White House. by Elizabeth Shackelford. To listen to the representatives of the U.S. government lately, you'd think the United States is at imminent risk of a communist takeover. Communism is the single greatest threat to our country and its history, President Trump said in a recent speech outside Atlanta. House Speaker Mike Johnson has likened the midterms to a battle between maintaining the republic if his party wins or losing it to communism if it doesn't. Last month, Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed it was a transnational threat, with the Cuban government conspiring with America's far left. It's a well-worn trope in American politics harking back to the Joseph McCarthy era of the 1950s and the associated Red Scare. But why has it returned now? Because when a party in power is deeply unpopular, it must find another boogeyman to blame its people's woes. Anyone with a vague understanding of communism knows that these claims are disingenuous. But some Americans are susceptible to believing it, particularly those who came of age during the Cold War when communism was shorthand for our gravest national threat. The first step to combating disinformation is real information, so here are some facts. Communism is a political and economic system in which property, means of production, and natural resources are collectively owned by the community or state rather than private individuals and divided either equally or according to need. The concept was introduced in the 19th century by Karl Marx, who wanted to abolish private property and dissolve class distinctions in order to be more fairly distributed resources. But this concept of communism doesn't exist in the real world. No countries today are run under communist principles. The 5 countries that still officially claim to be communist states are China, North Korea, Laos, Cuba, and Vietnam. What do they have in common? All are one-party systems designed to obstruct political competition, and all have varying degrees of state interference in the marketplace. Only North Korea's government has total control over the economy. The rest have mixed systems with different levels of centralized planning and state control. None are the classless societies envisioned by Marx. Instead, most have privileged political classes tied to the ruling party that benefit disproportionately from the state's economic control. Communist states today are more corrupt than communal. Democratic socialism is a different political philosophy entirely. The broad movement may have many interpretations, but all versions promote a robust democracy to make government accountable to the people, a mixed economy where the government ensures that utilities and services that are essential for human well-being are managed for society rather than profit, and a strong social safety net. The democratic socialism growing popular in the United States today basically seeks the social support most European countries offer. Affordable health care, energy, and public transportation are hardly a threat to our democracy. If there is a communist threat clawing its way into the halls of American power, that threat is coming from inside the White House, which has interfered with the free market not for social benefit, but to strengthen its own centralized power. The Trump administration has engaged in an unprecedented campaign of government meddling in business affairs. It has leveraged the threat of regulatory consequences to press dozens of private companies into giving the government equity stakes in their businesses, from semiconductors and nuclear energy to minerals and steel, as the New York Times has reported. A shareholder of Intel has already brought a lawsuit claiming that the Trump administration secured its 10% stake in that tech company through extortion. In each of these cases, the federal government is now both the regulator and a shareholder, raising questions about whether commercial competitors in important U.S. industries still have a level playing field and whether regulatory action will continue in the interest of the public or of profitability. As one example, the price for regulatory approval of NVIDIA's advanced chip sale to China was given a cut of the revenue to the government. Trump may gloat about the earnings, but that did nothing to address the very real national security concerns with handing our greatest adversary a leg up in the artificial intelligence race. But state economic control isn't the only lesson Trump has taken from states such as China. He aspires to a non-competitive political system with centralized authority, too. Trump has pushed aggressively for gerrymandering to dilute the electoral power of his political opponents, even punishing members of his own party who declined to pursue it. And he is bullying a reluctant Congress to pass the SAVE Act to raise barriers to voting. According to Trump, the law would ensure that Republicans would never lose an election again. In an interview this year, he said midterm elections shouldn't happen either. Like China's Xi Jinping, Trump believes his power should be absolute. That may not reflect communist philosophy, but it does reflect the flavor of governance that most so-called communist states offer today. In that case, we may face a communist threat, but it isn't coming from the foes of this administration. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Another Voice by Robert Duffy. Education helps build a strong workforce. Ask any business leader across New York what keeps them up at night, and you'll likely hear the same answer: finding and keeping skilled workers. Throughout our state, employers in manufacturing, healthcare, technology, construction, and countless other industries are all competing for the same talent. Here's what I learned. The workforce in New York needs for tomorrow is not built in a job interview. It's built years earlier in a classroom, when struggling students either get the support they need to catch up or fall further behind. I've spent my career watching that connection play out as a police officer and chief, walking Rochester's neighborhoods as a mayor, as lieutenant governor, and now leading the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. When we set young people up to reach their potential, our businesses get stronger, our neighborhoods get stronger, and our state gets more competitive. It's that simple. Every student who builds stronger technical and problem-solving skills is one step closer to becoming the machinist, nurse, software developer, or electrician our economy will need in 5 to 10 years. Some students need tutoring, specialized services, after-school programs, summer learning, or technology to keep pace with their peers. Closing that gap, for as many students as possible, is workforce development, whether we call it that or not. That's where the new Federal Educational Choice for Children Act comes in. Signed into law in 2025 and taking effect January 1st, 2027, this federal scholarship tax credit gives any taxpayer a dollar-for-dollar federal tax credit up to $1,700 for donating to an approved scholarship granting organization. Those organizations then direct the funds to eligible students and families for tutoring, tuition, and other higher educational supports. New York must opt in for our students to participate, and Governor Kathy Hochul has signaled she intends to do exactly that once federal guidance is finalized. I encourage her to follow through. 27 states have already signed on. New York shouldn't cede ground on a tool this straightforward. Opting into a federal scholarship tax credit is one more concrete step towards a stronger workforce and more competitive New York. Spotlight Energy. State will need more electricity in the coming years, by David Robinson. New York is going to need more electricity over the next 2 decades. A lot of it. Exactly how much isn't clear, but a new report from the New York State Independent System Operator, which manages the state's power grid, predicts that the increase in demand likely will be substantial. The report outlines several different scenarios for the state's electricity consumption. The baseline increase, as forecast by the ISO report, predicts that electricity demand will rise by about 1/3 between now and 2044. In the highest growth scenario, power demand could surge by around 55%. In the lowest, the increase is forecast to be around 8%. Rising demand, generator retirements, and public policy choices all point to the need for new resources and stronger transmission, said Zach Smith, the ISO Senior Vice President of Systems and Resource Planning. Exactly how much electricity will need to be depends in part on how quickly the state moves on its goals to push homeowners and businesses away from heating with natural gas and other fossil fuels to less polluting sources such as electricity and heat pumps. The state in recent years has been taking fossil fuel-powered plants out of commission faster than it has been adding new renewable resources. It also hinges on how many power-guzzling big projects come to the state, from computer chip factories such as the one Micron Technologies is building in Syracuse, to power-hungry data centers. But it is more complicated than that. Rising power demand means there's also a need for an upgraded and expanded transmission network to deliver that power to where it is needed. An all-of-the-above approach to energy development, supported by competitive wholesale electricity markets, will be critical to maintaining grid reliability through this transition, Smith said. 5 Things to Know About Derelict Buffalo Grand Hotel by Jonathan D. Epstein. Sitting at the southeastern end of downtown Buffalo, the hulking Buffalo Grand Hotel languishes as a testament to decades of decline, a renovation plan gone sour, and the struggles of a developer with dreams but no dollars. Canadian developer Harry Stinson had high hopes and grand plans to redevelop the city's largest hotel and restore its former glory as an events and conference center. Instead, those ambitions have been repeatedly dashed as one stumbling block after another, including some of his own making, has derailed those plans. And despite his oft-stated intentions to keep trying, the city is stuck with a derelict structure with crumbling concrete, cracked pavement, dirty windows, and overgrown weeds. Originally built in 1978 as the Buffalo Hilton, the 486-room hotel has been vacant for over 6 years, since it closed when the pandemic struck in March of 2020. But instead of reopening a month later, as hotels did, the Buffalo Grand has remained shuttered because of a long renovation, a devastating fire, a prolonged insurance battle, a lack of funding, and the ongoing legal fight with Canadian regulators that Stinson said is hindering his ability to bring in new partners. The city is fed up with waiting and ready to take control. Here are 5 things to know about the Buffalo Grand, Stinson's challenge, and what may happen. Why does the hotel matter for downtown? It's a chicken and egg scenario for tourism. Buffalo needs to have large hotels in order to attract and accommodate the kind of large conventions and meetings that can bring hundreds or even thousands of people to downtown, where they'll spend money in restaurants, at shops, and at tourist attractions. But in order to justify the large hotels, it also needs to have big organizations and event planners expressing interest in coming to Buffalo, which they won't if there isn't enough space to hold them in the first place. The 9-story Buffalo Grand, formerly the Adams Mark Hotel, is by far the largest hotel in Buffalo, not only because it has nearly 500 rooms, but also an extensive 72,000 square foot banquet, events, and conference center that Stinson enlarged, a 600-seat restaurant, and a 600-space parking garage. It's also in a prominent location with high visibility from the Niagara Thruway. Of course, the 600,000 square foot complex is somewhat isolated from the core of downtown, as it's separated from the central business district and government area by 6 lanes of Church Street, as well as the Skyway ramps, and it's a hike to the Buffalo Convention Center. What's the plan? Why hasn't it happened? Stinson bought the Buffalo Grand for $17 million and soon unveiled plans for more than $24 million in renovations. The hotel has endured years of neglect or underinvestment by multiple owners for more than 20 years and had been panned by guests, hospitality officials, and others for its dingy appearance, aged furnishings, and dated carpet. He backed off from the most elaborate plans, but still broke down walls to expand the largest ballroom and invest in new carpeting, lighting, painting, and other cosmetic changes using the pandemic closing to get the work done. And he lined up a deal with Wyndham Worldwide to rebrand the hotel as a Ramada and reopen at the end of 2021. But that's when someone set fire to rolls of carpeting in a room on the event level, causing more than $50 million in losses. Stinson had a $100 million insurance policy from Travelers Insurance, but spent the next 3 years fighting with the carrier to collect. Ultimately, he received just enough in late July 2024 to pay off his $20.4 million mortgage and stave off foreclosure. But he didn't have much money left to complete the repairs and renovations needed to open. Since then, he has been unable to line up enough new financing or investment. Meanwhile, he's suffered a host of legal woes, including contractor liens for unpaid bills and federal, state, and county tax and unemployment insurance warrants. And then Ontario securities regulators accused him of violating provincial law by improperly soliciting nearly $10 million from 2017 Canadian investors for an aborted condo conversion at Buffalo Grand. He was found guilty in an administrative hearing, banned from Ontario security markets, and fined $10.8 million, which Ontario regulators are now seeking to enforce in New York State Court. Hasn't Stinson made a lot of promises? Plenty, and not just with the Buffalo Grand. He's promised a grandiose makeover of the hotel with a renewed focus on conventions, events, and hospitality, and he even planned to expand with a new 300-seat comedy club and new wedding chapel inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright design. He proposed a condo conversion for one half of the hotel rooms, as well as a 25-story condo tower next to it. He has said multiple times that he's close and just needs a little more time, saying he could get the hotel reopened within 4 months if the city would cut him some slack. Additionally, he also owns the Wonder Bread factory at 356 Fogarton Street, which he planned to redevelop as an extension of the banquet and event spaces at the Buffalo Grand, despite the distance between them. That building has also sat vacant for years, as Stinson had lacked the financial wherewithal to complete either project. Stinson does have experience in redeveloping and restoring large-scale historic buildings, including One King West and the Candy Factory at Toronto. But this isn't his first unsuccessful venture locally. He also took aim at both the historic Hotel Niagara in Niagara Falls, but ultimately agreed to sell the 12-story building to USA Niagara Development Corp., who later brought in another developer. And he had plans for the Central Terminal that never came to fruition. How long will it be till something happens? Probably a while. Certainly months, maybe even years. Earlier this year, he thought he had a $20 million deal with a Tampa-based investor, but it fell through after the investor toured the hotel and decided instead that he and his group wanted majority control, which would have frozen Stinson out. 2 weeks ago, Stinson said he was on the verge of a deal with another new potential partner, an independent hotel owner with properties in Seattle, Miami, and Barbados. He would not identify him at the time, saying they were still negotiating a deal. What's going on with the city takeover? In the meantime, the pressure is building. Stinson and the Buffalo Grand, as well as the Wonder Bread factory, have already been written up multiple times by city building inspectors, dragging him into the housing court to respond to the violations. He's downplayed the citations and says the needed repairs can be made within 3 months. But the city is now threatening to take action against him. A year ago, former Mayor Christopher Scanlon announced his intention to use a 3-year-old state abandonment law to seize the property and resell it to another developer. According to Scanlon, Stinson had racked up 18 code violations and owed nearly $90,000 in taxes and sewer bills, while the hotel had broken windows, graffiti, and unhoused individuals living inside. Scanlon held another news conference in October, again threatening to proceed. Now, he said, Stinson owed nearly $357,000 in back taxes and other fees on the hotel, plus about $100,000 for the former Wonder Bread plant. Late last year, Stinson asked the incoming Ryan administration for a reprieve, saying the threats were hindering his efforts to land a partner. Ryan agreed, giving him 90 days to strike a deal. But when that first deal with the Tampa investor fell through, the city restarted its abandonment proceedings. However, as with any court process, it'll take a while, likely a year or more, depending on whether Stinson fights it, as he says he will. Amazon seeking another $3 million in sales tax breaks by Jonathan D. Epstein. When you've already got $26 million in sales tax breaks, what's another $3 million? That's the position Amazon is in, asking the Niagara County Industrial Development Agency for additional incentives for its massive $550 million warehouse and distribution center project in the town of Niagara. The extra $3 million in sales tax subsidies would cover the taxes on $37.5 million in additional purchases beyond what the retail giant originally anticipated. Amazon was approved 4 years ago for $123 million in sales, property, and mortgage recording tax breaks for the regional distribution hub, including $26 million for sales tax relief alone. That was the best guess estimate at the time, based on calculations that were still approximate, said NCIDA counsel Mark Gabriel. But since then, the project scope has grown more costly due to advancements in material handling equipment systems and updates to the new generation facility design, as well as cost increases in the past 4 years, according to a letter to the NCIDA from Brad Griggs, Director of Economic Development for Amazon. That would increase the price tag of the total project to at least $587.5 million, with $29 million in sales tax exemptions. However, Amazon will voluntarily forgo a $3.5 million in mortgage recording tax breaks that it was previously approved for, effectively negating the additional sales tax relief. NCIDA will schedule a public hearing on the request before considering it for final approval next month. Meanwhile, work continues on the 5-story building at 8995 Lockport Road, where developer JB2 Partners is constructing the 3.1 million square foot facility for Amazon on the northern 111 acres of a 217-acre parcel of vacant land adjacent to the Niagara Falls International Airport. That's equivalent to 53 football fields. The facility will serve as a regional distribution hub and first-mile fulfillment center for the company in Western New York, and will include state-of-the-art robotics equipment and more than 1,000 employees who would receive bulk shipments of products from vendors, suppliers, and sellers, and then package them for shipment to sortation and delivery stations. Griggs said the project is on track for opening in the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year, and added that hiring could begin as soon as this month. Meanwhile, more than 2,906 construction workers have been involved in the project, and crews have completed $13 million in off-site infrastructure improvements. From garbage to renewable gas. A new renewable natural gas generation facility has begun operation at a landfill in Allegheny County town of Angelica, in partnership between a regional waste and recycling company and a renewable energy company that is designed to produce clean gas from garbage. Casella Waste Systems, Inc., based in Rutland, Vermont, teamed up with Waga Energy for a new large-capacity RNG production facility at the Highland landfill, marking the second of 3 such projects developed by the duo to begin operations after the one in Chemung County. It's also the 4th RNG project overall for Casella. That's part of Casella's effort to get more value and use out of the landfills and waste that it manages. The new facility converts landfill gas into renewable gas or biomethane. The facility is capable of generating up to 180 gigawatt hours of renewable gas each year, making it one of Waga's largest such operations in the United States. Using U.S. Environmental Protection Agency standards, it will reduce carbon dioxide emissions by the equivalent of 47,000 tons annually. The operation was constructed by Wagga, which will own and operate it for 20 years. A spooky twist for a zombie hotel. The saga of Amherst's former zombie hotel continues. 3 years ago, a New York City developer revived a partially constructed but unfinished and abandoned hotel at 1265 Sweet Home Road next to the university at Buffalo's North Campus and converted it into Air Buffalo, a 154-unit apartment building. The $27 million project by DMG Investments, which also owns the Auden Buffalo Student Housing Project on North Forest Road, created a 6-story building with a mix of studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom apartments. Its opening in September of 2023 seemed to put an end to an ugly story of prior neglect that haunted Amherst's development scene. But now it's back in trouble, this time with the investors who hold its $18.2 million loan from January 2024. Deutsche Bank AG, the trustee representing the bondholders for the mortgage-backed security containing the debt, has filed for foreclosure against an affiliate of DMG, citing default because the developer has failed to make loan payments since March 1st, according to a lawsuit filed in State Supreme Court in Erie County. Additionally, Deutsche Bank and special loan servicer CW Capital Asset Management noted that contractors have filed 3 liens against the property for payment of past bills, which interfere with the bondholder's interest in the property, also in violation of the loan agreement. The lawsuit seeks payment of $17.78 million in principal, interest, late fees, attorney's fees, and other costs. Besides DMG, the lawsuit also names the Amherst Industrial Development Agency, which had granted $3.5 million in tax breaks to the project, as well as the 3 contractors with liens, Murray Roofing Company of Cheektowaga, Strokes Painting and Contracting of East Amherst, and GP Rochester of Rochester. Those companies say they are owed $14,382, $13,588, and $23,227 respectively, but the lawsuit seeks to eliminate their claims on the property. David Mingoya, executive director of the Amherst IAD, said DMG is currently on its tax payments, but the agency is protected just in case. We've not received any documents, but have the legal right to terminate and recapture tax benefits in the event of a default, he said. 6 companies vie to be the coolest. 6 Western New York companies are among the contenders for an unusual designation, the coolest thing made in New York. The Business Council of New York is organizing the 3rd annual contest to highlight manufacturing in the state. Online voting will choose the winner over the course of a series of rounds that narrow the field. There are 35 nominees. The winner will be announced at the Business Council's annual awards dinner in September and will host a site visit on the Business Council's manufacturing bus tour in October of 2027. The first 2 winners of the competition were from outside Western New York. To qualify, a company doesn't have to be based in New York State, but the product must be made in the state. The local nominees are General Mills, Cheerios, Moog Inc., Linear Actuation System, which helps 2 spacecraft safely dock with each other, Parker's Great British Institution for a classic pork pie, Perry's Ice Cream, Indulgent Premium Ice Cream, Rosina Food Products for Italian-style meatballs, and your custom chair for a captain chair. Tenants coming to Industrial Park. Expect to see more businesses commit to moving into the former Sumitomo Rubber USA plant in the town of Tonawanda. Huifeng Industrial Park, which now owns the site, shared that news while confirming Hoda Industry Manufacturing will be a tenant at the Sheraton Drive complex. Hoda will join a growing roster of tenants at the park, with several upcoming tenant announcements also expected in the months ahead, Huifeng Industrial Park said in a statement. Taiwan-based Hoda, which makes gears for the automotive industry, plans to create up to 50 jobs. The announcement did not specify when Hoda would start its local operations. Huifeng Industrial Park is part of the Huifeng Rubber, which is also based in Taiwan. It bought the former Sumitomo site in April for $39.5 million, with plans to fill the nearly 2 million square foot site with multiple tenants, including manufacturing, assembly, logistics, and technology business operations. Huifeng has said it will set up its own tire-making production at the plant, but has not specified how soon that will happen, citing volatility in the tire-making industry. CHIPS Act begins paying dividends. 4 years after it was signed into law, the CHIPS and Science Act is having an impact on upstate New York. Senator Chuck Schumer championed the legislation, which is designed to stimulate domestic manufacturing of semiconductors. We're proving that America can once again make the technologies the world needs and lead the industries of the future and outcompete China, Schumer said. Edwards Vacuum is preparing to open a plant in Genesee County that will produce pumps for semiconductor manufacturing facilities. The project received $18 million in CHIPS funding. Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse jointly received $40 million in funding through the Tech Hub program that was established as a result of the CHIPS Act. Its focus, under the NY Smart One Corridor banner, is bolstering the semiconductor industry in upstate New York. To date, $2.1 million has been awarded across the corridor, according to Schumer's office. By working together with our partners across Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse, we are creating opportunities for local businesses to grow and for people to build good careers in the semiconductor industry, said Grant Loomis, President and CEO of Buffalo Niagara Partnership. Wilson Grant boosts soccer for success. A grant from Ralph C. Wilson Foundation will provide around 4,500 Western New York youth with free soccer programming, healthy meals, and life skills over the next 3 years. The Independent Health Foundation received the $375,000 grant to support its Soccer for Success program, the U.S. Soccer Foundation's Youth Development Initiative. From 2027 through 2029, the funding will provide youth ages 5 to 13 with free soccer programming and access to fresh produce provided through the program. The grant removes financial barriers to participation, ensuring more children can experience the lifelong benefits of organized sports. The Soccer for Success program is offered at no cost to participating families through schools and community organizations nationwide, including through Western New York. Fan trip planned by Miami AAA. AAA Western and Central New York is offering another group travel tour for a Buffalo Bills road game. The trip to Miami to see the Bills play the Dolphins will go from January 1st to 4th with a stay at the new hotel with the resort-style pools and dedicated beach access. The game will take place at 1 p.m. on January 3rd. The group tour includes round flight trips between Buffalo and Miami, 3 nights at the Hilton Miami Beach with breakfast, a lower-level sideline ticket to the game, fans of Buffalo tailgate experience, and round-trip and game day transportation in Miami. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section and the Buffalo Next section of the Buffalo News, Sunday, August 16th, 2026. We read from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Jean, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine, and at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more, and if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-55. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,